So please, these scare campaigns about, frightening old and sick people. You guys had a picture of a woman a pensioner eating dog food on the front page of, national newspapers. So just stop it.
G'day and welcome to Spectator TV. My name is Will Kingston. I host Fire at Will, a podcast from the Australian edition of The Spectator on politics and culture. Australians went to the polls on the weekend and it was a stunning result. Most people were predicting a relatively tight race. It wasn't. The incumbent Labor government, led by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, won a majority, a staggering 87 seats. You need 76 to form a government in Australia. There was some thought that they would need to form a minority government in order to squeak through. It really was a landslide. In fact, it was the first time since the Federation of Australia that a first-term government has had a swing towards it in its first term. A truly astonishing success. And it raises questions for the opposition Liberal and National parties, collectively the coalition, who seem to be now devoid of a purpose. To help me understand what just happened in an extraordinary weekend of Australian politics, I'm delighted to be joined by Michael Kroger, former head of the Liberal Party in Victoria, and Stephen Conroy, former Communications Minister in the Rudd government. Michael, Stephen, thank you very much for taking the time. A particular thank you, Michael. These election wash-ups are always worse for one person relative to the other, and Stephen has won out this time. I will start with you, Michael. Did the Labor Party win this election, or did the coalition lose it?
Yeah, very good question. Predominantly Labor won it, and we partly lost it. So overwhelmingly, Labor won the election, because they ran a brilliant negative campaign against the coalition, and the coalition's positive plan wasn't strong enough. So basically, as is the case in Britain with the Conservative Party, our number one brand equity here in the Liberal Party and the national parties in Australia is economic management and tax policy. Debt deficit, management of the budget, management of the Australian economy. So effectively, we weren't strong enough on that at all. We had no serious plan for dealing with debt or deficit, no serious policy for reform, change. There was no change agenda. And in the end, we ran on a couple of policies, which was cheaper petrol and $1,200 tax handout next year for people. Well, increase, and that led to our forecast for the next 2 years of increasing the size of the national budget deficit. Well, if you'd said to people who didn't know which party's policies do you think they are, people would probably said, well, I think they're probably the Labor Party, giving away free money to people and increasing the deficit, that'd be Labor. So I thought our tax offering was, an economic offering was very poor and not strong enough to usher you through a whole campaign. On the other hand, Labor ran a very effective campaign, as they do every 10 years, to say that the Liberal Party are going to basically close down the national health system. People got concerned by that. Obviously, they believed it, as they did in the 2016 election, which was a slight variation of it. They associated us with Donald Trump, said we were, Trump-like, which was a great irony, because today our re-elected Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has had a phone call with Donald Trump, who says what a great bloke Albanese was, and he didn't know the opposition leader. And I felt like saying, well, I wonder if Albo told him that one of the reasons he won the election was because he got all these people to say how much they all hated Donald Trump. I don't know whether Albo mentioned that in his call with the president this morning, but that having been said, so they're the principal reasons. Weak policy offering by us on our number one brand equity, and a very strong negative campaign by Labor, which absolutely landed.
Look, I think Michael's summed up a lot of the issues. He's avoided criticising Dutton's actual performance during the campaign, and that's because Michael's a very decent human being. But, we normally say in politics, who won last week? And Dutton didn't win a single week of the 5-week campaign, but it's worse than that. I don't remember a single day that Dutton won. So you might say, okay, he won that day and that day this week, but lost the overall week. I don't remember a single day where Dutton won. His performance was full of stumbles, backflips, disastrous policy announcements that they reversed within a reasonable period. And as Michael said, their tax policies were a shambles. I couldn't tell you how shocked I was, to Michael's point, when you read the fine print of their costings and discovered they were going to have too big a budget deficits than Labor for the next 2 years. So I think Albo came out from Christmas. Paul Erickson, our National Secretary, devised a strategy going forward for the 3 or 4 months in the lead up to the election, and Albo prosecuted it to the letter. He didn't have during the campaign any stumbles, and one of the great fear behind the scenes was that Albo had done not his best performance in that first campaign. People famously remember he had a disastrous first week, caught COVID the second week, and so there was behind the scenes nervousness. But by the time he got to the campaign, he was bouncing, he was confident, and he barely put a foot wrong for the entire campaign. But one of the other factors that went largely unnoticed was that Peter Dutton was the most unpopular person to run for Prime Minister in a long time. Dutton's rating of -30, the approve-disapprove metric, he was on -30. That was more than Scott Morrison was on 3 years ago. So, Peter Dutton was more popular across Australia than Scott Morrison. And that's a very big thing to say.
Michael, I'll unleash here. I agree with what Stephen's just said, but I also think Albo is pretty underwhelming compared to the Hawks, the Keatings, the Menzies, the Howards of times gone by. I think Dutton was underwhelming. It feels like across the board in Australian politics, we are not producing the types of leaders we once did. I think Dutton is a good political operator. I think Albanese is a good political operator. I don't think either of them are within they're not anywhere near those names that I mentioned before. Why are we not producing leaders like we once did?
No, I think that's quite right. Look, I'm sure Albo's, a good fellow to have a beer with, but you got to remember that up until 6 weeks ago in Australia, Labor were behind in the polls. They had been behind in the polls for most of the previous year and a half. So the public's view of Albo was this guy is not all that good. I think there was a clear majority of voters in answer to the question, does the government deserve to be re-elected? A clear majority of voters said no in a number of polls, but he got re-elected. So I think a lot of people are turned off by the whole political process these days. And, you're finding it harder and harder to get absolutely quality people. I mean, look, as I said, I'm sure Albo's a nice bloke, but he's not, he's a number 7 batsman. That's what he is. He's not a wicketkeeper either. He's just a number 7 bat who they sent into open, and he's run a good, effective campaign, a weak government, but an effective campaign, and got himself re-elected.
Well, look, I mean, Michael liked to talk about the failings of Anthony Albanese without recognising the other side of the equation, which was just the extraordinarily poor performance and unpopularity of Peter Dutton. I mean, Michael's a polite bloke. He's not going to give Dutton the hard time, but if you're reading the papers in the last few days, people are unloading on him in the Liberal Party about what a shocking campaign it was, how they wouldn't even poll in his own seat because they were too scared to tell him because he'd lose confidence. The pollsters that were advising him it's now been revealed that they weighted it for what was referred to as the voice referendum. I mean, this was a disastrous campaign, disastrous polling giving him advice. And I think one of the other factors, I think Michael would agree, is that Mark Latham and John Howards ultimately voted to abolish the parliamentary superannuation or pension for politicians. And many would argue that since that, you've seen a lower quality candidates on both sides. Obviously, I'll disagree with that on the Labor side. We've got lots of high quality people, but it makes it particularly hard to attract people who earn good money in the private sector. So there's no question I think that is the case. And of course, one of the big problems the Liberals have is attracting women to their party to run. And I know they had one of the better efforts this time to run largely in marginal seats, but there's almost no women left in the parliamentary party, whereas Labor's now hit 50%. And we've now got a far better representation of multiculturalism, male, female. So we've been able to achieve a broad diversity across that looks more like ordinary Australia than the Liberal Party on the other side, which looks largely like particularly older white males.
Well, Michael, I'll continue on this theme because I was reading this morning in the Sydney Morning Herald from Charlotte Mortlock. This election, I believe we had the highest calibre of female Liberal candidates ever. Unfortunately, they were forced to sell a shit sandwich. Does the Liberal Party have a problem with women, and did that contribute to the loss here?
Well, our vote amongst women is always a bit lower than Labor's. Historically, that's always been the case. We had a number of fantastic female candidates that didn't win, including people like Katie Allen in Chisholm. So historically, fewer women have voted for us, more men have voted for us. So make of that what you will. The answer is the surf hits all swimmers. So the tide that hit us hit both the female candidates and male candidates and male members.
What was that tide, Michael? Because sorry to interrupt you, but this is the question that keeps going through my mind, and that is 6 weeks ago, the coalition was leading in the polls, and I was listening to you, I was listening to Kosamaris on Sky News, and around 2 months ago, you were predicting a coalition victory, and the turn was extraordinary around that 6 week mark. What happened?
So Medicare happened. So, as I said, for a year and a half, people thought the government was no good. Labor came out and said the coalition government will privatise effectively the national health. We'll slash and burn funding for the national health system. And the Medicare card, which is our, card you go to the doctor with, and which means that, a significant proportion of your fee is paid for by the government, that's going to be slashed and burned. Urgent care clinics, which are government-run doctors' clinics, they're going to be closed. They scared the living daylights out of sick people, old people, infirm people into thinking that under a coalition government, their health care will be sadly diminished. Now, in Britain, how people judge the NHS to be, a great national institution. And of course, Boris Johnson was falling over himself to clap the NHS workers during and after COVID, et cetera. And so to say basically the coalition was going to smash the health system to bits caught everyone's attention.
This has been a scare campaign for 30 years, and sometimes it's worked and sometimes it hasn't. Stephen, do you think that's the reason for why the Labor Party got over the line?
No, I think we played to our brand, which is, Labor created Medicare, Labor will enhance and increase Medicare. And the Liberals, whenever they've had a chance, have nibbled away at it, tried to undermine it. And, Dutton was vulnerable from a period when he was the Australian Health Minister, that he had attempted to make cutbacks. So we were able to exploit that. But I think there's two other factors that Michael hasn't mentioned. I think he got a mention earlier, but the Donald Trump factor was significant. From, I think, really the Zelensky Oval Office disgrace, followed up by, the tariff debacle. The major tariff debacle, captured attention, but in Australia it started before that because they were going to tax our steel. And Dutton made a big play that we're from the same side of the political fence. We'll be able to deal with Trump better. We've got all the connections. And he made a big play of attacking Albanese. And since November last year, the coalition had been cuddling up to Trump, saying how great he was, how his political agenda was so strong, how he defeated the woke debates. And so they really cuddled up to Trump. So suddenly they get this lunatic in the asylum running the US, and everybody is seeing it every day. People are looking at their superannuation pensions, and they're going, the chaos in the US markets, and they're going, oh my God, I've lost $50,000 in 3 days because of that idiot in the US. And the other factor which really, I think, helped Labor was in February, there was an interest rate cut. Now, the Liberals had run for years saying 12 interest rate increases. It's all Labor's fault. They can't control their spending. Inflation's high because of this. And so the Liberals were pitching backwards. They were saying, look how terrible the last 3 years have been. But that interest rate reduction made Australians think, right, the worst is over. How are we going to be in the next 3 years? And I think the Liberals missed that pivot. And because of that, they were underprepared in policy. And Michael's spoken well about how poor the policy offering from the Liberals was. I mean, they left their defence policy till, a week out. It was their second biggest, monetary offering. They offered $21 billion. And by then, almost half of Australians had voted.
Michael, let's look ahead now for both the next term of the Albanese government and the future of the Liberal and the National parties, collectively the coalition. This is there's no two ways about it. This is a landslide. This is a devastating result. It is the first time there has been a swing towards an incumbent first-term government since Federation. It is an incredible result, particularly given, as I imagine you would agree, Stephen may not, I think the performance of the Albanese government was mixed at best. I would probably say underwhelming. Is this an existential problem for the Liberal Party? We're seeing reform in the UK potentially driving the Conservative Party out. Is there a chance that the Liberal Party is facing extinction in Australia?
No, there's zero chance of that. The history of Australian politics is that we have this discussion every 10 years, usually about the other party. I've been in many discussions over the years where I've been asked, is this the end of the Labor Party? And every few years the wheel turns and it's now always the end of the Liberal Party. No, because the brand equities of the Liberal Party, which are economic management, national defence and security, and thirdly, a more democratised workplace, industrial relations reform, those three brand equities are still very strong brand equities for the Liberal Party.
Michael, are they though? Like, what really has been done by the Liberal Party since Howard on any of those three things? I'm thinking, I can't really think of any great structural reforms in economics. I think, as Stephen said, defence policy came out a week before the election. Industrial relations, everyone's been scared since work choices. What is the point of the Liberal Party today? I'm not sure that brand equity is still there.
Yeah. No, that's a fair question. There will come a point in Australia. There will come a point in Britain. There will come a point in America. There will come a point in every Western country where a leader is going to stand up to much unpopularity early on and say, enough debt is enough debt. We cannot keep driving these countries into debt generation after generation and leave it all for our children down the track, right? Governments now relying on inflation to reduce the value of their indebtedness. These schemes they have in Australia, we have this scheme where you can announce government spending, but it's because it's considered an investment, it's sort of on capital account, so it's not considered part of the budget profit and loss. So you can hide all these tens of billions of dollars expenditure on this mythical notion that they're going to earn an economic return down the track, so they're not part of a current expenditure. All these funny money economic sort of schemes, these make work schemes, government trying to pick winners. So we've been through this debate for 30 or 40 years. In the end, governments will get hit by the economic reality stick of life. And that's going to hit Australia as it is going to hit America. I mean, they've got 36 trillion US 36 trillion of debt. I mean, how long can this keep going on? So sooner or later, the Liberal Party will come out and say, this has got to stop. They're going to be the adult in the room. And what's happened over the last 10 years here, as it has in a lot of Western countries, is debt and deficit have lost currency as anything that young people need to worry about. There's an endless stream of money to be handed out by governments. Just added to the debt, it's no real problem. No one seems to worry about it, that it will never, ever be paid off in our lifetimes. People think, well, as long as I get something. And then, of course, in Australia, they're told two things. We have this argument that Stephen's mob have, which is the coalition have secret cuts planned for you. So everyone gets scared about all these alleged secret cuts that are coming, which is sort of, another way of saying don't vote for the coalition because your benefits might be taken away. So this is the merry-go-round in Australian politics that we've been going around for more than a decade now, and people are used to getting things from government. They rely on things from government, but sooner or later, a Liberal Party leader is going to have to say enough of this. We can't keep going on driving these budget deficits into record levels. I mean, in Australia, when this fellow Albanese became Prime Minister in the 21-22 budget, our debt here was 895 billion Australian dollars. And in 28-29, it's going to be 1.223 trillion. So it's gone up it's going to go up 328 billion Australian dollars in a 7-year period. Well, that's just unsustainable. I mean, this stuff's unsustainable. Sooner or later, the Liberal Party will come out and take on debt, have the courage to do that, have the courage to campaign against this whole secret cuts notion by saying to people, debt is unsustainable. It's unsustainable in your household. It's unsustainable for the nation. And the public will, in the end, say, right, you're right. We've got to stop this age where everyone thinks the government can hand out money and there are no consequences.
Stephen, I noticed that Michael said at some point in the future, the Liberal Party will start caring about fiscal responsibility again. And that is concerning to me because it implies, I think quite rightly, they don't at the moment. But at the same time, the Labor Party is spending like drunken sailors. They basically bribed their way to this election, paying off university debts and all that sort of stuff in a way that many people would associate with a centre-left government. Why does the Labor Party not seem to care about this fiscal problem either?
Look, I fundamentally reject your characterisation. I mean, Michael makes a point about the size of debt. And all you have to do is go to 2022's budget and get Josh Frydenberg's budget out and have a look at his 10-year forecast for debt, okay? And it was over $1 billion. So Josh Frydenberg, in their last budget, remember they were going to be back in black? Okay, the COVID hit. But Josh Frydenberg's own budget forecast this incredible rise, which meant if they'd have won that election in 22, Josh Frydenberg would be dealing with this. So Michael tries to make a point about debt and deficits, which his own party were, I won't say guilty of, because the COVID crisis hit the world's economy. But to try and portray that this is somehow Labor's creation of $1 trillion worth of debt. Now, what Jim Chalmers is correct in saying is we've reduced the level of debt as it was going to be under Josh Frydenberg. So Labor has run 2 surpluses, which Michael just spits chips about. So we've retired some debt. So our trajectory on debt, despite it going over $1 trillion, is lower than Josh Frydenberg's trajectory. That's the first point. And secondly, very frustrating part of the economic debate is the last refuge of the economic charlatan is start quoting numbers that have no meaning. So what I mean by that is you go, oh, the deficit's going to be $30 billion. Okay, this is less than 2%. It's between 1.5% and 2% of GDP. When you see the size of the Australian economy and you put it as a percentage, you realise that having a deficit of 20, 30, 40 billion dollars is really quite trivial in the economic sense when you're measuring it against. But if you're the economic charlatan who's trying to make a political point on the front page of a tabloid, you say $40 billion this year, $40 billion next year. It's unsustainable. It's not. So the idea that being in deficit is a bad thing is a ludicrous notion. If you do it over time and you have no capacity to repay, then a household would have a problem. But governments have the ability to create money, to have the reserve power to increase taxation. And so you cannot measure a household against a government and an economy. They are fundamentally different things. So please, these scare campaigns about, frightening old and sick people, you guys had a picture of a pensioner eating dog food on the front page of, national newspapers. So just stop it.
Michael, it sounds like we shouldn't worry about the deficit. Why are you being an economic charlatan?
Well, because, as we know, Economics 101 says that if you keep increasing the size of the national debt, you increase the size of the national annual interest payments or monthly interest payments, depending on the kind of bond you've issued. And that eats up monies that would perhaps be allocated elsewhere. You can't keep spending beyond your capacity to raise money. And if you keep spending, you have to keep increasing taxes. If you increase taxes, we know what happens. And apart from everything else, business will go offshore from Australia. We have massively high energy prices here. People will go offshore. Capital's mobile, businesses are mobile, personnel are mobile. So you've got to have a competitive country. At the minute, Australia is becoming less competitive. Like the Americans, why is Trump on this Doge train, and why are other Western governments seriously concerned about their debt levels? Was because it's unsustainable. I mean, we've seen what's happened in Africa and South America decades ago, where you have unsustainable debt levels. I mean, you can't do it in a household. You just can't have a credit card that has no end to it, and governments are no different. So increasing debt year on year, but what's happened in the Western world is you just pass it on to the next person, the next president, the next prime minister. You just hand this hot potato on to the next one, let them worry about it. That's been the record in the Western world in the last 10 or so years, and it's unsustainable. That's why we have to worry about it.
I have one final question for both of you. We are recording this from the Spectator offices in the United Kingdom. Most of the people watching this will be from the UK. From both of your respective sides of politics, can UK political parties, the Conservatives and Reform on the right now in the United Kingdom, and then the Labor Party on the left, what lessons can they take from this election? Stephen, I'll start with you. What lessons can the Starmer government take from the re-election of the Albanese government?
Well, look, I think Donald Trump will overhang UK politics like he has Australian and Canadian politics. So I think Keir Starmer needs to be firm. You have to be rude, but you have to be firm that the UK will stand up for its own interests. It won't be bullied by Donald Trump. It's not going to accept his foreign policy edicts where he sucks up to Putin, that the Russians are a serious threat across Europe and NATO is important. And the other message should be, don't be spooked by the economic charlatans who want to talk about the size of British debt and how it's going to cripple the country, etc., as Michael's just tried to do. A measured and balanced response to the state of the economy. I mean, Angus Taylor, this is no joke, Angus Taylor said the way I'm going to fix the deficit and debt is I'm going to grow the economy. Now, fundamentally, I agree with that, but that is certainly not a response that the Liberal Party took any credence of. So first thing you've got to do is not plunge the economy into recession. Absolutely, cutting government, slashing and burning will plunge the UK economy into recession. So he needs to get the right balance between a trajectory towards reducing debt and deficits, but not doing it insanely like the Conservatives would, and have a true sense of what's important. Being in government is about priorities. So Starmer's got to make sure he's got the right priorities, not be panicked by Conservative media, and certainly not be pushed around by Donald Trump on any of these issues. I mean, Trump will try and interfere in UK politics. He's already been barracking Farage. I think there was a little spat recently. He's interfering directly in German politics. It's just don't be spooked.
Well, Stephen's right about one thing, which is the association with Trump hasn't done well for the Conservative Party here, and it won't in Britain. I think Nigel Farage's spat with Elon Musk didn't do Nigel Farage any damage, obviously, by viewing the results on the weekend of those by-elections and council elections. He's got to stand up to Trump on the Ukraine, where I agree with Stephen 100%. I thought Trump's behaviour towards Zelensky in the Oval Office was just appalling. And for the leader of the free world to say he's not on anyone's side, Ukraine or Russia, I'm sort of the umpire in the middle, is a preposterous and outrageous statement to make from someone who is actually the leader of the democratic world. So stand up to Trump on those type of issues. Continue to stand up against blatant anti-Semitism, which broke out here in Australia, and which did the Labor government a lot of damage here. They're still elected, but it's done a whole lot of damage to social cohesion in this country. So Starmer's got to continue to stand up to the Corbynite wing and their supporters around the world, around Britain. And finally, I think the great message is, 20 years ago, we had an issue with unlawful boat arrivals. We stopped them under a coalition government. After a bit of time, the Labor Party here agreed with our policies. Now, illegal boat arrivals in this country are almost non-existent. We can see what's happened to the British Conservative Party. Farage is standing up for Middle Britain on that. And the lesson for the Prime Minister there, as we learned 20 years ago, is you cannot have open borders. As much as you have sympathy for those people who have a lesser standing of living than the people in Britain, everyone wants to come to Britain, everyone wants to come to America, and everyone wants to come to Australia. It's just not possible. We're not heartless. It's just not possible. And so unless Starmer does something about that, boy, I don't know what you think, but Farage is making huge headway because he's standing up on that issue. And Starmer, if he goes the way of the Conservatives, which was this weak, pathetic response where nothing much happened except voter arrivals increased, Starmer will be out of office sooner rather than later.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, compared depending on your point of view, it's still 4 years for Starmer, and it's 3 years for our Anthony Albanese. It is, whichever way you look at it, a stunning success for Labor. Gentlemen, I appreciate very much both of your insights today. Thank you so much on a busy day for taking your time and coming on Spectator TV.